Good evening, dear friends. I'm Davis. Welcome to the Curious Case. Tell me something simple. Why do you enjoy these quiet mysteries? Leave your answer below. And do subscribe if you wish to keep this warm corner alive. Tonight, we begin another gentle puzzle. Calm at first, steady at first, but not for long. Shall we begin? Because tonight's piece hides something quiet and cold. Miss Marple sat in her small cottage. The house was quiet. The morning was steady. Nothing rushed. She held a blouse in her lap. A simple blouse. A loose button waited at the edge of the seam. A tiny task. The kind she liked. Her needle was ready. Her thread was neat. Her glasses sat low on her nose. Everything was arranged in the usual order. She worked slowly. One stitch, then another. Her movements were practiced. She had done this thousands of times. She knew the logic of a good stitch. Tight, even, secure. A cup of tea waited on the small table. Steam rose in a soft line. It drifted upward. Calm, predictable. She paused to sip. Warm, mild, exactly how she liked it. She looked toward the window. Light came through at a gentle angle. Not bright, not dim, just steady morning light. Birds made small sounds outside. Not loud, not distracting. Just the usual village notes. Miss Marple liked this hour. It held order. It held routine. It held the quiet she trusted. She returned to her sewing. The button sat perfectly in place now. One more stitch would finish it. She checked the spacing. Straight, centered, correct. Her mind drifted. Not far, just toward the simple facts of the day. She needed to post a letter. She needed to return a library book. She needed to check the chrysanthemums. Ordinary tasks. Nothing urgent. But something small pressed at her thoughts. A faint sense. A feeling without shape. Not fear, not worry. Just a light pressure. Like a drawer that didn't shut fully. Like a picture frame slightly. Tilted. Something. Not quite in place. She glanced around the room. Everything appeared as it should be. Her cushions, her books, her knitting basket. Nothing moved, nothing disturbed. Yet the feeling stayed. Quiet, persistent. Miss Marple trusted such things. Small feelings often came first. Then the reasons followed. She had learned that long ago. People said she noticed everything. She did not. She only noticed what was out of rhythm. She finished the last stitch, tied the thread, trimmed it neatly. The button was secure now. Correct. As it should be. She tested the blouse gently. All firm, all steady. But the unease remained. A thin thread in her mind. Barely there, but not gone. She took another sip of tea. Warmer now. A little stronger. She held the cup in both hands. She waited. She listened. Nothing unusual. Not yet. She placed the cup down. Slowly, exactly in its usual spot. Her eyes shifted toward the window again. The light felt different now. Still calm, but slightly off its usual mark. Miss Marple breathed in. She knew this feeling. A quiet signal. A small warning. The morning felt unusual. The knock came fast. Sharp. Too sharp for a calm morning. Miss Marple looked up. Her needle stopped mid-air. The sound came again. Firm. Insistent. Not polite. Not casual. She set the blouse aside. She stood slowly. Her joints protested a little. Another knock followed. Even quicker this time. She reached the door. She opened it. A villager stood there. Young. Breathless. Face tense. Coat half-buttoned. Hands shaking slightly. Miss Marple. Sorry. Urgent. She stepped back. Come in. He shook his head. No time. He swallowed hard. His voice came out thin. There's trouble at the old parsonage. Miss Marple held the door steady. What sort of trouble? A collapse, he said. A woman. Mrs. Felton. He wiped his forehead. Found in her sewing. 2-room. Miss Marple listened. Simple words. But the edges were wrong. She waited. People reveal truth when they breathe. She let him breathe. He continued. Looks like a stroke. Doctor has been called. His tone didn't match the message. It wavered. It carried something else. Uncertainty, maybe fear, maybe confusion. Who found her? Miss Marple asked. The maid, he said. Ellen. She ran out crying, came to fetch help. He looked down at the ground, then up again. Miss Marple. She's not responding, not moving, not speaking. Miss Marple noted the details. Short, rushed, unsorted. Was she alone? She asked. Yes, he said. At least, we think so. Miss Marple nodded once. A small, controlled motion. Did anyone hear anything? He frowned. Nothing. Not a sound. She was fine yesterday. Perfectly fine. Miss Marple felt a familiar shift inside her. Not alarm. Not panic. Just logic adjusting itself. Facts. Entering a pattern. A pattern not yet clear. When did this happen? She asked. Just now, he said. Maid went in to bring tea. Found her slumped forward. Needle on the floor. Thread still in her hand. He rubbed his arm. Doctor says stroke, but I don't know. Something felt wrong. There it was. The word she listened for. Wrong. People feel wrongness before they define it, before they explain it, before they understand it. Miss Marple recognized that signal. She heard it often, from villagers, from staff, from anyone caught in a moment that didn't fit. Who else is there now? She asked. Housekeeper, maid, and Mr. Langley from next door. He went in when the maid screamed. Miss Marple took her coat from the hook. A simple coat. Plain. Reliable. She slipped it on. She reached for her handbag. She carried only what she needed. Nothing more. Nothing less. The villager stepped back to allow her out. I knew you'd come, he said quietly. Miss Marple locked her door. She checked it once. A habit. Always a habit. They walked toward the lane. No hurry, but no delay either. The light had shifted again. Subtle, barely noticeable, but present. Miss Marple felt the earlier unease settle deeper. Not fear, just awareness. Awareness that something waited at the old parsonage. Something that did not belong to morning routine. They reached the corner. Miss Marple slowed. She let the facts settle. She let the silence speak. She knew this pattern. Too quiet, too sudden, too clean. She stopped walking. She considered the details again. Then she looked ahead. Miss Marple paused. Something wasn't right. The old parsonage stood quiet when Miss Marple arrived. Not silent, just quiet in the wrong way. A held breath, a room waiting for someone to speak. She stepped through the gate. The villager who brought her walked ahead. No one else was in sight. Not a gardener. Not a delivery boy. Not even the usual neighbor crossing the lane. Miss Marple noted that first. Absence. Absence always meant something. They reached the front door. It was open. Wide enough for urgency. Not wide enough for panic. She entered. The air felt heavy. Not warm, not cold, just tight. A tension that settled over the hall. Footsteps sounded from the left. Soft, uneven. The maid appeared. Ellen. Young. Pale. Hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had no color. Miss Marple. Thank you for coming. Her voice trembled once. Then she forced it steady. Good girl, Miss Marple thought. Trying to be proper even now. Where is Mrs. Dane? Miss Marple asked. In the sewing room, Ellen whispered. She hasn't moved from her side. Miss Marple observed Ellen quietly. Eyes red. Apron creased from wringing. Hair slightly out of place. Signs of shock, yes. But also signs of worry deeper than the moment. You found her? Miss Marple asked. Ellen nodded. Tea tray at 11. Always 11. I went in and... Her voice thinned again. She didn't answer. Miss Marple placed a hand on the girl's arm. Not for comfort, for steadiness. Calm steadiness. It helped the girl breathe. Take me to her, Miss Marple said. They walked down a short passage, wooden floor, simple frames on the wall, nothing disturbed. Yet the air remained strained. as if the house held its own memory of the collapse. Ellen pushed the sewing room door open. Mrs. Dane stood beside the chair, rigid, hands gripped together, eyes fixed on the collapsed figure. She turned as Miss Marple entered. "Thank you for coming. It's dreadful, just dreadful." Her voice was tight, not weeping, not trembling, just controlled. Too controlled. Miss Marple nodded in acknowledgement. She looked around the room. Quick, unobtrusive, a method she had perfected. Sewing materials lay on the table, fabric folded, needles arranged, a pincushion, near the edge, everything in order. Except one thing, a spool of red thread, on the floor, not near the chair, not near the table, alone, against the far leg of a cabinet. Miss Marple fixed her gaze on it. Not long, just long enough. She kept her voice mild. "How long has it been like this?" Mrs. Dane followed her eyes. "That. Oh, I don't know. Didn't notice it." Ellen looked surprised. "It wasn't there yesterday," she said softly. "I cleaned the floor. Everything was tidy." Miss Marple nodded once. A single, thoughtful gesture. She didn't touch the spool. She only observed it. Distance, placement, direction. Too far to roll on its own. Too deliberate to be accident. She stepped closer to the table. She looked at the chair, then back at the spool. A straight line formed in her mind. Quiet, simple, logical. Why was the spool there, at all? Mrs. Felton lay still in her sewing chair. Her posture was fixed. Her head rested, slightly forward. Her hands were relaxed in a strange way. Not gripping, not reaching, just resting where they had fallen. The room was quiet, very quiet. The kind of quiet that held more than silence. A closed quiet, a contained quiet. Miss Marple noticed that first. She stepped closer, slow steps, measured steps. She did not want to disturb anything, not even a thread. Mrs. Dane watched her closely. Ellen stood near the door. Neither moved. Their stillness matched the room, and the room matched the body. Miss Marple looked at the chair, a simple wooden chair, cushions slightly indented. No struggle, no displacement, everything too orderly. She looked at Mrs. Felton's face, calm, not twisted, not strained, eyes closed, lips parted slightly, no sign of a final fight. Then she moved her gaze to the table. The sewing tray sat neatly arranged, everything in its place, almost too much in its place. She looked again, carefully. Nothing tipped, nothing scattered, nothing showing sudden collapse. Her eyes paused at one object. Scissors, placed very neatly, parallel to the edge of the table, aligned in a way people rarely use. Tools rarely end up perfect like that. Tools people actually use, that is. She said nothing. She simply held the image in her mind. Order that felt unnatural. Order that tried too hard to be ordinary. A knock sounded in the doorway. The doctor appeared. Dr. Weatherby, steady man, old friend of the village. He nodded to Miss Marple. She stepped aside to let him pass. He moved toward the body with quiet purpose. He examined Mrs. Felton briefly. Not rushed, not slow, just with the confidence of long habit. He placed 2 fingers at her wrist. He checked her eyes. He checked the angle of her neck. Then he stepped back. He inhaled once, a thoughtful inhale. "Looks like a stroke," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Not doubt, just incompleteness. As though the diagnosis did not settle comfortably in his mind. Miss Marple heard that gap. She trusted such gaps. People reveal truth in hesitation, even trained people, even doctors. "Was she sewing?" he asked quietly. "Seemed to be," Mrs. Dane answered. He nodded but did not agree. Miss Marple saw that. He was collecting facts that didn't fit. He stroked his chin. "Odd posture," he murmured. "Not impossible, but odd." Miss Marple moved a little closer to the chair. Not touching, just observing from a better angle. She looked at the seam on the fabric in Mrs. Felton's lap. A simple hem. A familiar pattern, sewn often, repaired often, nothing special. But one stitch caught her eye. One small stitch, pulled out. Not fully removed, just tugged, slightly displaced. It sat wrong. Wrong placement, wrong angle, wrong tension. She leaned in slowly, silent, focused. That single stitch told a story. A story the room tried to hide. Marple saw one stitch pulled out. Miss Marple turned slightly toward the maid. Ellen stood by the door. Her hands twisted in her apron again. Her eyes kept drifting toward the sewing table. Not long, just momentary glances. Glances that betrayed thought. "Ellen," Miss Marple said gently, "may I speak with you for a moment?" The girl nodded, small, tense. "Yes, Miss Marple." They stepped a little aside. Not out of the room, not far. Just enough for privacy without secrecy. Miss Marple preferred such distances, close enough to observe, far enough to hear clearly. "You found her?" Miss Marple asked. "Yes," Ellen whispered. "Just after 4. Miss Marple noted the time. Steady routine. "Tea at 4? Ellen nodded. "Always at 4. Mrs. Felton liked it that way. Every day. Never changed. Routine. Routine always mattered." Miss Marple kept her voice calm. "What did you see when you entered?" Ellen took a breath. Not steady, not broken, just controlled enough to speak. "She was in the chair," she said. "Like this. Not moving. I called her name. She didn't answer." "Did you touch anything?" Miss Marple asked. Ellen shook her head quickly. Too quickly. "No, nothing. I didn't touch a thing." Miss Marple waited. Silence often revealed more than questions. Ellen continued. "I put the tea tray down. Here." She pointed to a small table. "Close to the chair. Normal placement. Correct placement. Routine placement." But her hand trembled. Just once. Miss Marple noticed that tremble. It was not fear. It was guilt. Soft guilt. The guilt of someone hiding a small truth. Not a crime. Just a detail. Miss Marple spoke gently. "Ellen, what worried you most when you walked in?" The girl hesitated. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes dropped. Then she answered softly. "The sewing box," she said. "It wasn't where it should be." Miss Marple looked toward the table. The box sat neatly now. Closed. Centered. Correct. "Where should it have been?" she asked. "Always by the lamp," Ellen said. "On the right side. Never on the left. Mrs. Felton kept it that way." Miss Marple nodded. "And where was it today?" "On the left," Ellen said quietly. "Open." Miss Marple kept her tone steady. "You said you didn't touch anything." Ellen's eyes widened. Her breath caught. "I didn't. I just saw it. Open, not where it belonged. An inconsistency. Simple. Telling. The kind of inconsistency that mattered more than any dramatic clue." Miss Marple asked. "How did you know it was open if you didn't step closer?" Ellen swallowed. I don't know. I just noticed it. It caught my eye. I was thinking about tea, about the tray. I didn't go near it." But her voice betrayed her. She had gone near it. Not far, but near enough to see, near enough to know. Mrs. Dane watched from the other side of the room, her face unreadable, her posture rigid. She said nothing. Miss Marple took one small step back. She did not challenge. She did not accuse. She only observed. Patterns were starting to form. Small ones, quiet ones, but patterns nonetheless. The sewing box had been moved. The maid felt guilt. Her story contained a gap. Routine was broken. Miss Marple filed it away silently. Miss Marple moved toward the sewing box. Slow steps. Quiet steps. She did not want noise. Noise confused thought. Silence revealed it. The box sat neatly on the table now, closed, centered, as if someone had corrected it, as if someone wanted it to appear untouched. She rested her fingertips on the edge, not to open it, just to feel the placement. It was slightly angled, barely noticeable, but not aligned with the lamp base. Mrs. Felton never left things like that. Miss Marple lifted the lid. A simple movement. Controlled. Gentle. Inside, threads sat in rows. Colors grouped in familiar patterns. White, black, grey, then brighter tones. Red, blue, green. Everything neat, everything precise. Except one thing. Miss Marple's eyes settled on the thimbles. Two should have been there. Always two. One silver, one brass. Mrs. Felton used the brass one most. The silver one was kept for visitors or special mending. But today, the silver one was missing. In its place sat another brass one. Dull. Scratched. Not hers. Not part of the set. Miss Marple leaned in. No reaction. She did not let her face show interest. People watched reactions. Better to reveal nothing. She studied the inner tray again. Everything else was in order. Threaded needles, loose buttons, a small folding ruler. Pins stuck tightly in a cushion. Then her gaze shifted. A needle case sat near the corner. A small wooden case, carved with tiny lines. Simple design. Mrs. Felton prized it, kept it straight, always centered, always facing the same direction. Today it was crooked, just enough to suggest movement. Not clumsy movement, purposeful movement. Someone had opened it. Someone had changed something. Someone had failed to put it back the right way. Miss Marple did not touch it. She only observed. Distance mattered. Touch disturbed truth. She preferred to watch before she handled anything. She shifted her sight to the lower compartment. Empty spaces told stories too. A bobbin missing. A patch of fabric missing. Small things. Not valuable. Not meaningful to most people. But, to a woman who sewed daily, every missing item stood out. Every gap meant use or disturbance. Miss Marple paused. She looked at the table surface. A faint mark sat where the sewing box usually rested. A clean outline. The box was placed slightly forward now. Someone moved it. Someone changed its position. Someone hoped the room would hide the change. Ellen watched from the doorway, nervous. Hands twisting again. Mrs. Dane stood stiff near the chair, her eyes unreadable. Her posture, too, rigid. Miss Marple closed the box gently. She placed it back exactly where she found it. Same angle, same distance. No correction, no improvement. Just preservation. Patterns formed again. Small ones, quiet ones, but tight enough to matter. One wrong thimble, one crooked needle case, one shifted placement, one missing item. This was no accident, not clumsiness, not confusion. Her eyes returned to the thimble, the dull brass one, scratched, old, unfamiliar, out of place. It should not have been there. Miss Marple left the old parsonage with steady steps. She needed distance. Not far, just enough to think, enough to let the details settle. The lane curved gently, hedges trimmed, grass neat. A familiar house waited 2 doors down. Mrs. Price lived there. Mrs. Price knew everything, not by spying, not by interference, by listening, by observing, and by hearing the things people said when they believed no one else listened. Miss Marple knocked once. Light, not urgent, just enough. Seconds later, the door opened. Mrs. Price appeared with her usual brisk expression. "Oh, Miss Marple, you heard." Miss Marple nodded. "I was called." Mrs. Price stepped aside. "Come in, tea's ready." Miss Marple entered the small sitting room. Warm, tidy, teapot already placed near the hearth. 2 cups. A plate of biscuits. Routine, and routines always mattered. "Sit, dear," Mrs. Price said. "I knew someone would come ask questions, and if anyone should hear it, it's you." Miss Marple poured a small measure of tea. Warm steam drifted upward. No strong scent, just simple brewed leaves. She held the cup, not drinking yet, just listening. Mrs. Price leaned forward slightly. "You know about the will, don't you?" Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "No, not yet." Mrs. Price nodded knowingly. "Then I'll tell you. Mrs. Felton changed it. Just last week." Miss Marple let that sit. "No reason given?" "Oh, plenty of reasons," Mrs. Price said. New arguments, old resentments, family matters. She lowered her voice. And a visitor. Miss Marple looked up. A visitor? Mrs.? Price nodded. Quiet one. Came twice. Stayed briefly. Never gave a name. Miss Marple waited. Patience always brought more. Mrs. Price continued. Not local. Clothes too fine. Shoes too clean. The kind of person who doesn't walk village lanes. Miss Marple sipped her tea. No reaction on her face. But the details settled into place. A visitor. A will. A collapse. Threads forming a shape. Mrs. Price added. And the maid saw him again 2 days ago. Standing near the gate. Not knocking. Just watching the house. Miss Marple held her cup steady. Did anyone speak to him? No, Mrs. Price said. Not a word. He left before anyone could. Silence rested between them. Not heavy. Just waiting. Then Mrs. Price leaned in even closer. And that's not the worst of it. Miss Marple did not move. Her stillness invited truth. Mrs. Price whispered, There's a name tied to this. A name I haven't heard in years. Miss Marple set the cup down. Softly. Controlled. Whose name? Mrs. Price hesitated. Fear? No. Memory. A memory she didn't want to disturb. When I heard it, she said, my blood went cold. Because that name should have stayed buried. Long buried. She swallowed, voice lowering again. It came back through a whisper. Through that visitor. Through the talk around the gate. Miss Marple waited. She didn't blink. Mrs. Price inhaled, then exhaled, and the truth slipped out. A name returned from the past. Miss Marple left Mrs. Price's house quietly. No rush, no delay. She needed to speak to one more person. The solicitor, Mr. Halbridge, a careful man, a silent man, and a man who understood wills better than he understood weather. His office stood at the end of the lane. Small sign, simple lettering, open window, no frills. Miss Marple knocked once, a single tap, enough to identify herself. A voice called out, Come in. She stepped inside. Papers stacked, folders arranged. Everything neat, everything controlled, just like the man behind the desk. Mr. Halbridge looked up, his eyes softened. Miss Marple, I expected you. She sat down. He folded his hands. He did not waste time. You're here about Mrs. Felton, he said. Not a question, a statement. Yes, Miss Marple replied. I'm told there were changes. He nodded. He reached for a file. Dark green. Well handled. Not old. Not new. He opened it. Several sheets clipped together. He slid one forward. This, he said, is the revised will. Miss Marple looked at the page. Not reading fully. Just scanning. Names. Amounts. Conditions. She noted a signature dated last week. Very recent. Very deliberate. What was changed? She asked. Mr. Halbridge tapped the page. 3 things. A small adjustment to the housekeeper's portion. A removal of a distant cousin. And he paused. Miss Marple waited. Patience. Always patience. The addition of a new beneficiary. Miss Marple looked directly at him. No expression, just quiet interest. Who? He hesitated. Once. Only once. Enough to reveal discomfort. A person named, he said slowly, Clara Whitcomb. Miss Marple said nothing for a moment. Clara Whitcomb. Not a village name. Not a familiar line. Not someone connected to Mrs. Felton's known circle. Do we know her? Miss Marple asked lightly. No, Mr. Halbridge said. Not officially. Mrs. Felton told me very little. Only that this person must be included, and that the matter was urgent. Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. Did she seem calm? Mr. Halbridge's face tightened. He removed his glasses. He cleaned the frame slowly, a common gesture. But his hands were not steady. No, he said quietly. She seemed frightened. Miss Marple nodded once. Of what? I don't know, he said, but she looked over her shoulder more than once. as if someone might walk in, as if she expected interruption. He placed the glasses back on. She signed quickly. Her voice was strained, her hands shook. Miss Marple absorbed each detail. Recent fear, new beneficiary, unknown visitor, a watched house. Did she explain the urgency? Miss Marple asked. Mr. Halbridge shook his head. She only said the matter was overdue, and that she regretted waiting so long. Regret, fear, urgency, a name from nowhere, a collapse, a sewing room prepared too neatly. The pieces formed a pattern, not complete, not clear, but undeniable. Miss Marple stood. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "If you learn anything, I would appreciate being informed." Miss Marple gave a small, courteous smile. "I will." She stepped outside, closed the door gently, held her handbag lightly, and paused, because the pattern shifted again, not enough to solve, but enough to tighten. A new will. A new name. A frightened woman. Something didn't add up. Miss Marple walked the garden path behind the old parsonage. She wanted air. She wanted distance. She wanted a different angle. The garden was simple. Trimmed hedges, short beds, a few late blossoms, and one man working near the far corner. Mr. Hill, the gardener, quiet, steady, a man who remembered everything that grew, and everything that happened near it. He looked up as Miss Marple approached. "Trouble inside," he said softly. "Not a question. A fact." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes." He leaned on his rake. "I heard the maid crying. Then I saw the doctor go in." Miss Marple studied him. Calm, not shaken, just thoughtful. A man who had seen many years of small village storms. "Mr. Hill," she said gently. "How long have you worked here?" He gave a dry smile. "Since before Mrs. Felton married. Nearly 35 years now." "Then you knew her well," Miss Marple said. "Well enough," he replied. She was fair, firm, rarely raised her voice, but she carried worry in her shoulders. Always did. Miss Marple let that settle. What kind of worry? He looked toward the house. Old worry, not recent worry. She waited. He continued. "There was trouble here once, long before the maids, you know. Long before Mrs. Dane." "What kind of trouble?" Miss Marple asked. He pushed his rake into the soil. Not to work, just to hold himself steady. "A scandal," he said slowly. "Quiet, but deep, enough to shake the house for years." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who was involved?" "A seamstress," he said. "Worked inside the house. Bright girl, quick hands. Too quick, maybe." He exhaled. "She was dismissed. Sudden. Sharp. No reason told to anyone. Just gone one morning. Her things handed out the back door." Miss Marple noted the tension in his voice. Not gossip. Memory. "Why dismissed?" she asked. "No one knows," he said. But the lady of the house was shaken, and Mr. Felton was silent, dangerously silent. He looked at Miss Marple again. That girl left in shame, never seen again in the village. Miss Marple connected each piece. A seamstress, a dismissal, a sudden removal, a family shaken, and a woman who kept sewing tools for decades. "Do you remember her name?" Miss Marple asked quietly. He nodded. "I do." It was whispered enough times, said in anger, said in fear, said in regret, later. He rested both hands on the rake. "It started with W," he said. "That much I recall. A strong name. Not common." Miss Marple's heart moved a fraction. Only a fraction. But enough. Mr. Hill continued. "Whit. Something. Whitford? Whitlow? No. Wait." He looked up at the sky. Memory returning in pieces, in fragments. "Whitcomb," he said finally. "Yes, that was it. Clara Whitcomb." Miss Marple felt the logic tighten. Past and present joining. A thread linking rooms separated by decades. Clara Whitcomb. The seamstress dismissed in scandal. The woman written into the new will. The visitor who returned. It could not be coincidence. The name matched the one in the will. Dr. Weatherby stood near the sewing chair. arms folded, brow tight. He looked less certain than before. Miss Marple returned to the room, quietly. Without announcing herself, she liked to hear the truth before people shaped it. The doctor noticed her. He sighed. "Miss Marple, I may have spoken too soon." She nodded once. Then something changed. He looked at the body again. "It's the posture. It bothers me. It shouldn't, but it does." Miss Marple waited. The doctor continued. "A stroke is possible," he said. "But the angle of her head, the position of her arms, it doesn't match collapse. Not natural collapse." Miss Marple stepped forward a little. "Explain." "She's too composed," he said. "People who collapse fall. They don't settle. They don't fold their hands. They don't keep their shoulders so still." Miss Marple looked at the body. Calm. Too calm. Yes, she saw it now. "No bruise on the shoulder," she said. "No mark from a fall." "Exactly," the doctor replied. "And her tea is untouched." Miss Marple turned. Ellen stood in the doorway again, listening, trying not to be obvious. Miss Marple asked softly, "Did she always drink her tea immediately?" Ellen nodded. "Always. Even if she was in the middle of sewing." She said it helped her think. Miss Marple let that detail drop into place. "Another part of the pattern." The doctor rubbed his chin. "I also checked her hands. No sign of gripping. No sign of sudden strain. And no evidence of a stroke." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "None?" "None," he said. "I can't say more without a full examination. But something interfered with her. Something sudden. Something she didn't expect." Miss Marple shifted her gaze to the sewing table. The scissors still lay too neatly. The needle case still crooked. The spool still out of place. One detail rose above the others. A small one, but powerful. She looked again. 2 cups sat on the tray. Not 1. 2. Side by side. Clean. Ready. Waiting. Ellen followed her eyes. "Oh," she whispered. I didn't notice that." Miss Marple did. She always noticed such things. Routine broken. Pattern disturbed. A quiet wrongness hidden in plain sight. "Ellen," Miss Marple said softly, "does Mrs. Felton take tea with anyone?" "No," Ellen said. "Never. She drank alone. Always alone." Mrs. Dane stiffened. Her hands tightened. Her eyes flickered. A small tell, but a tell nonetheless. The doctor looked confused. 2 cups? Why 2 cups? Miss Marple did not answer. Her mind moved quickly now. Silent logic. Quiet deduction. Everything aligning. A new motive formed. A new shadow appeared. Not loud, not violent, just dangerous. Danger arriving without sound. Danger sitting in one of those cups. Miss Marple stepped closer to the tray. She studied the cups carefully. Spacing. Placement. Cleanliness. Too deliberate. Too prepared. She looked back at the others. Eyes steady. Voice calm. Then why was the sewing tray set for 2? Dr. Weatherby returned to the sewing room. His steps were steady. His face was tense. Not fearful, just focused. The kind of focus that meant he had found something he did not like. Miss Marple stood near the table. She waited. No questions, no assumptions, just patience. The doctor held a small cloth. Inside it lay the sewing needle, the one taken from Mrs. Felton's lap, the one that should have held nothing unusual, but it did. "I tested it," he said quietly, "as best as I could here." Miss Marple nodded. "And? There's residue," he said. "Very faint, but present." He unfolded the cloth. The needle glinted faintly in the weak light. Miss Marple leaned closer, not touching, just observing. "What sort of residue?" she asked. "A solvent," the doctor said. "Harmful, not immediately fatal, but enough to cause collapse, enough to mimic a stroke." Miss Marple absorbed each word, slowly, carefully. The doctor continued. "It was applied lightly," he said, "just on the tip, just enough to enter the skin. A prick during sewing would do it." Miss Marple took a small breath. A deliberate act. Yes, he said. No question now. Ellen gasped softly near the doorway. Her hand covered her mouth. Mrs. Dane stiffened even more. Her eyes flicked toward the needle case. Just once. Fast. But Miss Marple saw it. The doctor lowered his voice. This wasn't an accident. Someone prepared that needle. Miss Marple glanced at the sewing box, the crooked needle case, the missing thimble, the disturbed items. Each detail clicked into the next. A chain, a pattern, a method. She turned back to the doctor. When was this applied? Recently, he said. Hours. Maybe a day. No longer. Miss Marple's mind mapped the timeline. The visitor, the will, the fear, the collapse, the tray set for two, and now the altered needle. Could Mrs. Felton have done this herself? Miss Marple asked. The doctor shook his head immediately. No, the angle is wrong. The residue too specific. This was prepared by someone else. Miss Marple nodded. She expected that answer. She took a step toward the sewing table. She examined the needle case again. Crooked, misaligned, not in Mrs. Felton's usual manner. The needle had been removed, dipped, replaced, badly. Only one type of person handled such objects without thinking twice. Only one person moved the small sewing tools with familiarity. Only one person had routine access to the box. Only one person could change a needle without raising suspicion. She turned slightly. Her eyes moved across the room, first to Ellen, then to Mrs. Dane. Ellen looked frightened, but her fear came from confusion, not guilt. Her hands shook. Her posture collapsed inward. She was overwhelmed, not hiding. Mrs. Dane, however, stood rigid, back straight, hands folded, eyes narrowed, watching everything too closely, breathing too evenly. Miss Marple studied her for a long moment, not accusing, just noticing. A housekeeper knew every corner, every drawer, every object, including sewing tools. Miss Marple's voice was calm, soft, measured. There is only one question left, she said. Who handled the needle case? Her gaze settled, unmoving, because only one person handled that needle case. Inspector Slack arrived just after noon. He entered with his usual impatience, coat unbuttoned, hat tilted slightly, eyes scanning the room as if accuracy could be forced by speed. He stopped at the door. "Well, Miss Marple," he said, "I hear we have excitement today." Miss Marple did not smile. "Not excitement, Inspector. Something worse." Slack grunted. He stepped closer to the sewing chair. He glanced at the body. He looked at the scissors. He looked at the sewing tray. A quick scan. Not careful, not thoughtful, just fast. "Stroke," he said. "Happens at that age." Miss Marple shook her head gently. "No." Slack frowned. "You think otherwise?" "I do," she replied. "The facts do not agree with your assumption." Slack crossed his arms. "Then enlighten me." Miss Marple nodded once. She walked to the sewing table. Slow, precise. She touched nothing. She only pointed. "First," she said, "the scissors. Placed too neatly. Used scissors never stay that straight." Slack shrugged. "Maybe she tidied them." Miss Marple continued as if she hadn't heard him. "Second, the needle case. Crooked, not in her usual order." Slack squinted. "That's hardly proof." "Third," Miss Marple said, "one thimble replaced with a different one. A dull brass one. Not hers." Slack shifted his weight. His confidence thinned a little. But he stayed stubborn. "And?" he asked. Miss Marple walked toward the body. She kept her eyes on the fabric in Mrs. Felton's lap. "One stitch pulled out," she said. "Just one, and pulled in a direction she never used." Slack scratched his chin. "Odd, yes. Suspicious? I'm not convinced." Miss Marple stepped to the tray. "2 cups," she said. Yet she always drank alone. Slack's eyes narrowed. He finally leaned in. He examined the cups. Clean. Light ring on the saucer. Perfectly placed. "That is unusual," he admitted. "And one more detail," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. The needle. Slack looked at her. What about it? Miss Marple nodded toward the doctor. Dr. Weatherby stepped forward. The needle was dipped, he said, in a harmful substance, enough to cause collapse. Slack straightened. I see. He paused, then shook his head. No, someone would have noticed. Someone would have seen. Miss Marple faced him fully. Someone did, she said. Someone in this house. Someone with routine access to the sewing tools. Someone who could touch them without raising suspicion. Slack looked at the housekeeper. Mrs. Dane stiffened. Her face remained calm. Too calm. Miss Marple continued. The timeline is simple. The visitor came. The will changed. Mrs. Felton grew frightened. The needle was prepared. The tray was set for two. And one person ensured everything. Looked tidy afterward. Slack finally exhaled. A slow breath. He saw it. The trap. The method. The quiet violence hidden in a domestic room. Miss Marple stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. Find her, before she does more harm. Mrs. Dane sat in the small sitting room, hands folded, back straight, face calm in the wrong way. Too calm. Miss Marple watched her quietly, not accusing, just observing. Inspector Slack stood near the door, arms crossed, breath tight. He waited for the story to break itself open. Miss Marple spoke first. Soft, controlled. Mrs. Dane, you knew Clara Whitcomb. A pause followed, a long pause. Then the housekeeper exhaled, slowly. Yes, she said, her voice low, almost flat. I knew her. Slack stepped forward. How well? Mrs. Dane did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on the floor. She was my sister, she said. Quiet, plain, no drama, just truth. Slack blinked. He had not expected that. Miss Marple had. She nodded once. The missing connection finally stood in the open. Mrs. Dane continued. She worked here. Long ago. Before I did. Before I married. Before everything fell apart. Miss Marple waited. She knew the rest would come. It always did. She loved her work. Mrs. Dane said. Mrs. Felton trusted her, relied on her, spoke kindly of her. Another pause, a harder one. But there was trouble, she said. Trouble no one understood. Trouble that ruined her. Slack's tone sharpened. What kind of trouble? Mrs. Dane finally lifted her eyes. Pain showed now. Real pain. Old pain. A promise, she said. A promise made to my sister, and broken. Miss Marple tilted her head. What sort of promise? That she would be helped, Mrs. Dane said. That Mrs. Felton would protect her, that she would not be dismissed without cause. Miss Marple's voice stayed steady. But she was dismissed. Yes, Mrs. Dane whispered, without warning, without explanation, without mercy. She clasped her hands tighter. Clara left here in shame. People whispered. People judged. She had no family then. I was away. I didn't hear the truth until it was too late. Slack frowned. Truth about what? Mrs. Dane swallowed. Clara was blamed for something she didn't do. A small theft. A lie spread by someone jealous. Someone who wanted her gone. Her voice cracked once. Just once. Clara begged Mrs. Felton to believe her. But Mrs. Felton sided with the lie, and Clara suffered for it. Miss Marple's voice stayed gentle. What happened to your sister? Mrs. Dane looked away. She left the village. She found work where she could. She grew ill. She grew tired. She died alone. Silence wrapped the room. Not heavy, not dramatic, just factual. Mrs. Dane continued. I came here later. I found service. I kept quiet. No one knew who I was. She closed her eyes. And then I saw Mrs. Felton again. Alive, comfortable, unaffected, carrying on as if nothing had happened. Slack stepped forward. You wanted revenge. Mrs. Dane didn't deny it, but she didn't confirm it either. Her hands trembled, a small tremor, tightly held in place. I wanted fairness, she said. I wanted her to feel what Clara felt. Miss Marple's voice stayed steady. Fairness does not come through poison. Mrs. Dane opened her eyes. There were no tears, only weight, old weight, settled deep. "I know," she said, "but pain changes sense. It changes judgment. It changes everything." Miss Marple watched her carefully. The logic was clear, the motive was clear, but something else waited, something not yet spoken, because the story was not complete. Not yet. Miss Marple felt it. Slack felt it. Even Mrs. Dane felt it. There was more beneath the grief, more beneath the betrayal, more beneath the broken. "Promise." Mrs. Dane lowered her voice, barely above a whisper, but the truth was darker. The room felt still after Mrs. Dane's confession. Quiet, measured, holding something unfinished. Miss Marple knew the story had gaps, important gaps, and logic demanded they be filled. She turned toward the sewing table again. Every object had been touched, moved, disturbed, but one item sat half-hidden beneath the folded cloth, a thin booklet, yellowed at the edges, easy to overlook, easier to forget. Miss Marple reached for it, slowly, deliberately. She lifted the cloth and revealed the booklet fully. A sewing pattern, old, well used, the kind kept for years out of habit. Inspector Slack leaned in. "What's that?" "A pattern," Miss Marple said, "but not an ordinary one." She opened it carefully. The pages crackled. Inside, small handwritten notes lined the margins. Measurements, dates, alterations. Nothing unusual until the initials appeared. C. W. Miss Marple paused. Her finger rested under the letters. Slack noticed. "Those her initials?" "No," Miss Marple said quietly. "These belong to Clara Whitcomb." "Mrs." Dane stiffened. Her voice thinned. "She made those, years ago." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, this pattern was hers, from her time working here." She turned another page. More initials. More notes. A line of stitching instructions written in Clara's hand. Slack frowned. "I fail to see how this helps." Miss Marple ignored him for a moment. She kept reading. Then she found the small tear on the inside flap. A deliberate tear. Someone had tucked another paper behind it. Miss Marple eased it out. A folded slip. Old, but not too old. It held writing as well. A brief message. 4 lines. Careful handwriting. No signature. Miss Marple read it silently. Her eyes sharpened. "What is it?" Slack asked. Miss Marple handed it to him. He read aloud. "For debts unpaid, for promises broken, for truth ignored, this house will remember." Slack lowered the slip. "That's a threat." "It is a warning," Miss Marple corrected. "A warning left long ago. A warning ignored." Mrs. Dane swallowed hard. "That is Clara's writing. She must have hidden it." "But why?" Miss Marple closed the pattern booklet gently. "She hid it because she hoped the truth would surface, and because she believed someone might find it. Someone careful." She looked at Mrs. Dane. "You thought Mrs. Felton ruined your sister's life." Mrs. Dane nodded. "I did." "But she didn't," Miss Marple said softly. "She tried to protect her. She tried to pay her debts quietly. She tried to keep Clara's name from further ruin." Mrs. Dane froze. "What debts?" "The pattern shows it," Miss Marple said. "Clara borrowed money from someone local, someone dangerous, someone who used her dismissal to force silence. Mrs. Felton dismissed her to remove her from danger, not to punish her." Mrs. Dane shook her head. Tears threatened. "But Clara never told me." "She was protecting you," Miss Marple said, "as older sisters often do." Slack stepped closer. "So what does this have to do with the needle?" Miss Marple turned to the sewing box again. Routine, patterns, old habits. This house had lived the same rhythm for decades. "A woman who keeps an old pattern keeps old fears," Miss Marple said, "and a person who knows those fears can use them." She faced them both, firm now, calm. This crime began long before today, before the will, before the visitor, before Mrs. Dane. She touched the booklet one last time. Someone had planned this for years. Miss Marple requested one thing: a quiet room, no interruptions, no raised voices, just order, just logic. Inspector Slack agreed reluctantly. He preferred force. Marple preferred structure. She always won that debate. She chose the small morning room. Simple table, 2 chairs, a narrow window, calm enough for truth. Miss Marple placed 3 objects on the table: the crooked needle case, the altered thimble, the old sewing pattern with Clara's initials. She set them neatly. 1 line, equal space between each. Nothing dramatic, only deliberate. Slack watched, confused. Why these? Miss Marple did not explain. She positioned the chairs. She placed one slightly closer to the table, the other slightly back. She tapped the nearer chair. "This one," she said, "is for Mrs. Dane." Slack nodded. He brought her in. Mrs. Dane entered slowly, hands tight, eyes tired. Miss Marple greeted her softly. "Please sit." Mrs. Dane Saturday. Her eyes fell instantly to the objects. Her breath caught, her shoulders stiffened. A clear reaction. Miss Marple saw every detail. She stepped closer. "You know these," she said. Mrs. Dane swallowed. "Yes, I know them." Miss Marple nodded. "And you know what they represent?" Mrs. Dane's gaze shifted to the pattern. Her sister's initials: old ink, old pain. Slack moved behind her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Miss Marple pointed to the thimble. "Whose is this?" Mrs. Dane hesitated. Then she answered, "Clara's." Miss Marple nodded again. "And yet it was in Mrs. Felton's sewing box this morning." Mrs. Dane closed her eyes. She whispered, "I left it there, years ago." "But it was moved," Miss Marple said. "Recently." Mrs. Dane tensed. I didn't touch it yesterday." Miss Marple's tone stayed calm. "I know." Slack frowned. "You know? Then who did?" Miss Marple continued without looking at him. She pointed to the needle case. "Who handled this the most?" Mrs. Dane whispered. "I did. I always did." Miss Marple leaned in. "But someone else opened it last night. Someone who placed the poisoned needle inside. Someone who knew you. Would be blamed." Mrs. Dane looked up sharply. "What?" Miss Marple held her gaze. "This was never revenge for Clara. This was something older, something colder." Slack stepped forward. "Then who—" Miss Marple raised her hand. She wasn't finished. She pointed to the sewing pattern again. "To understand the present," she said, "we had to return to the beginning." She opened the pattern. Inside, beside Clara's initials, were 2 faint letters, barely visible, pressed by another hand. Same age, same era. F. W. Mrs. Dane whispered. "That's Felton. His initials." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, he kept secrets too. Secrets that never died. Secrets someone else discovered." Slack froze. His face changed. He understood now. Miss Marple turned toward the doorway. Her voice sharpened. "Bring in Ellen." The maid entered, eyes wide, hands shaking. But the shake came from fear of being caught, not fear of harm. Miss Marple placed the needle case closer to her. "You opened this," she said. "You moved the thimble. You set the tray for 2. You prepared the needle." Ellen's breath stopped. Her face drained. "Mrs. Dane gasped. No, she couldn't. Miss Marple stepped back. Logic complete. Pattern complete. "Clara wasn't your motive," she said softly. "Money was. Fear was. Debt was. You learned the old story. You learned the will was changing. And you acted." Ellen trembled. No denial came. Only silence. Slack stepped forward. Hands ready. Miss Marple watched the final moment. Everything aligned. Everything revealed. Everything inevitable. The trap had worked. And then Ellen whispered one final line. A line sharp enough to cut the air. "She left me no choice." Miss Marple exhaled. Soft. Final. Because at last the final thread snapped. Miss Marple stood beside the table. Everyone watched her. No noise. No movement. Just expectation. Just tension held in place. She spoke softly. The pieces fit now. Each object tells its part. Listen carefully. She pointed to the scissors first. Placed too neatly. Not natural. Not the gesture of someone collapsing. This was arrangement. After the act. She touched the needle case next. Usually straight. Always straight. Today crooked. Opened. Closed again. Not by Mrs. Felton. She lifted the brass thimble. Not hers. Brought from another box. Left here to shift suspicion. Left here as misdirection. Inspector Slack stepped closer. And the pattern. Miss Marple opened it. Clara's initials. Old ink. Old work. And Mr. Felton's initials beside them. 2 names tied by debt. 2 lives marked by a secret. Slack frowned. Still not enough. It becomes enough, Miss Marple said, when you add the tray. She gestured to the table. 2 cups. But she drank alone. Always alone. So why 2? She answered herself. To suggest company. To hide a moment. To cover what truly caused her collapse. Her tone sharpened. Not tea. Not shock. A prick. A needle dipped in poison. The doctor nodded once. Confirmed, he murmured. Miss Marple continued. Someone prepared that needle. Someone with steady access. Someone who knew the routines. Someone who worked close enough to touch everything. Her eyes moved to Ellen. Slow, clear, unblinking. You handled the tray, Miss Marple said. You handled the sewing box. You handled the needle case. You altered 1 thimble. You moved the spool. Ellen's breath trembled, but she didn't speak. Miss Marple pressed on. You knew the will changed. You knew money was shifting. You feared losing your chance. You feared the man who came to the gate. Shoes too clean. Voice too sharp. A collector of debts. Ellen's hands tightened. You saw Clara's old pattern, Miss Marple said. You read her message. You thought it. Gave you cover. You thought history would support you. You thought Mrs. Dane's connection would hide you. Mrs. Dane gasped softly. Miss Marple went on. You dipped the needle. You waited for tea time. You pricked her hand under the cloth. A quiet touch. A quick sting. Then you guided her back to the chair. You straightened her skirt. You tidied the room. You staged the scene. Slack whispered. And the cups. 1 for the fiction, she said. 1 to imply a visitor. 1 to explain the moment before she collapsed. A detail to soften questions. Miss Marple looked at the posture again. Too composed. Too calm. Too arranged. She did not fall. She was placed. She stepped back. Her voice lowered. The motive was debt. The method was order. The mask was routine. The frame was an old family wound. Her final words fell like quiet weight. Ellen prepared the needle. Ellen shaped the room. Ellen guided the lie. The room froze. Ellen finally lowered her head. A single, silent nod. Miss Marple ended in a whisper. And that is how she died. Good evening again, dear friends. Davis here. Thank you for staying with this quiet puzzle. These stories remind us of something simple. Truth takes time. Truth waits. Truth does not rush. Miss Marple teaches that patience is not weakness. It is a kind of strength, a way of seeing what others overlook, a way of hearing what others ignore. Even in the calmest rooms, patterns speak. And when we listen carefully, answers appear. So, let me ask you something gentle. Which detail caught your attention first, and which moment made you pause and think? Tell me in the comments. I read every word you leave here. Tonight's case showed how old choices linger, how small actions echo across years, how a thread pulled long ago can unravel a life much later. Not loudly, not suddenly, quietly, just like a loose stitch in a familiar cloth. If you enjoyed this moment of calm curiosity, you're always welcome here. This room stays warm because of you, and these stories breathe because you return. Now, rest. Hold your tea close, and remember our little ritual. Tomorrow, another kettle will boil. The night leaves one question open still, and its answer waits in the quiet. Listen closely, dear friends. A new path opens soon, quiet, unmarked, almost forgotten. One quiet lane waits in the dusk. One forgotten trinket rests where no one looks, and one truth sits under the dust, patient as ever. Miss Marple will walk that lane. She will lift that trinket. She will hear what others miss. And the next mystery will rise from a simple question. Not loud, not rushed. Just steady. Stay near. Keep your tea warm. Because one quiet lane, one forgotten trinket, one truth waiting, is already calling.